Okay, seeing as I've run out of bad date stories, the only other story that I have left to tell that's really significant enough to share is going to be an interview story that involves travel and potentially romance. So, I finished grad school in December of 2007, and January of 2008, I left the position I was working at the university as a student worker. I ran out of eligibility and started applying for jobs. And one of the first responses I got was from a private school in Florida called the Florida Air Force Academy. It's located in Melbourne, Florida. And not knowing how to drive at the time, not having a vehicle, my only option was taking the Greyhound bus. And I know that I sound like I have a lot of really bad experiences riding the Greyhound bus, and this is another one of them. But I really enjoy riding the Greyhound bus for that specific reason. I really can't explain what the compulsion is to ride the Greyhound bus or why I get such a kick out of it. But that's what I did. It cost me $100 to get all the way down to Melbourne, Florida and back. When I went to the Greyhound terminal in Paducah to wait for my bus, the only other person who got on was wearing a white t-shirt and gray sweats and carrying a big clear plastic bag. And it was pointed out to me later that that guy had probably just been released from prison. And I don't think it would have changed my opinion of the guy at all because we sat next to each other on the bus. I do remember after the first leg of the trip ended, waking up from being asleep with my head on his shoulder and apologizing profusely, just in the general context of trying to be polite. But so the bus trip was 26 hours one way. So it was a 52-hour round trip. And Greyhound is not the least comfortable way to drive. Approximately every 3 hours, you're going to stop somewhere. Like a Love's, for example, stop, get something to eat, use the restroom, get back on the bus, and head to whatever the next stop is. The entire time, I was just trying to prepare for the interview for this teaching position I'd applied for. It was TESOL, which is teaching English to speakers of other languages. So I was just trying to make sure that I was keeping straight any of the things that I needed to know or be prepared to discuss. So I got down to Florida, and the only really interesting experience on the trip down was the Atlanta bus terminal, which I was at midnight and was full of some of the strangest individuals I've ever encountered in my life. Got down to the Air Force Academy and took a cab from the Greyhound terminal, which was located really close to the airport, to my hotel, which was just a few blocks away from where the interview was. And I got in the car, and this guy with a southern accent asked me what I'm doing down in Florida. And I told him flat out, well, I just graduated from Murray State University. He says, Murray State? Are you a basketball fan? I'm from Tennessee, support UT Martin. You think Murray State has a chance at doing anything this year? One of the things that I just never pay attention to is college sports. And I had to tell the guy flat out, I have no idea. So we started talking about UK, started talking about UT Martin, started talking about Murray, started talking about OVC, and by the time I got the 4-mile taxi ride out of the way, I think I had learned more about college basketball in that 20 minutes than I could have expected to learn in the rest of my natural life. So I got to my hotel, got settled in, got ready for the interview, and went to the interview, which was a really interesting experience because it was a military school and they had some certain standards and ran the school a certain way. And the thing that really interested me about it was that at no point in my interview was I ever asked about my teaching skills or my qualifications or anything. The principal who was interviewing me asked me whether or not I could coach any sports, whether or not I could coach any extracurriculars, including the yearbook, and whether or not I was a fan of basketball. And it appeared that the 3 stars of their basketball team were in the ESL course, so I kind of figured out right away why he was so interested in whether or not I could coach and whether or not I cared about basketball. But the interview actually went pretty well. I ended up not taking the job just mainly because of ideological differences. I really didn't like the idea of just pushing people through the program based on their athletic skills. So I left Florida. I was down there in February and it sucked. It was cold, it sleeted. I saw the beach and it looked just about as miserable as Murray does in the wintertime. So I went back to the bus station, hopped on the bus, and they just came out of the woodwork. I was sitting in front of 2 guys who were on their way back from Daytona. And I hadn't slept. I almost forgot to mention the entire bus ride down, the time I was in the hotel, and most of the way back, I didn't sleep for, to the best of my guess, at least 72 hours. I'm thinking closer to the 90s. So I'm trying to settle back in my seat and relax, maybe catch some sleep on this leg of the trip. And I hear, hey. I'm like, is this guy talking to me? The guy behind me, what? Have you ever ridden the white horse? I'm like, he is not talking about what I'm thinking about. The guy next to him's like, no, man, I'm from Ohio. We don't have horses in Ohio. No, man, the white horse, heroin. The guy's like, no, never tried it. Well, do you want to? Yeah, okay. So at the next stop, these 2 leave and go to the bathroom together and apparently fix because they came back holding each other up and nodded out for the rest of the trip. And just having overheard that conversation kind of raised my awareness enough where I didn't get any sleep. So on to the next stop. I'm in a different seat because it was a layover, like 20 minutes or something. So we're on an entirely different bus. And I sit down and somebody sits down next to me, female, and starts up a conversation. She's like, yeah, I just got thrown out of truck driving school. That instructor, he had a bad attitude. He had a bad attitude. And they threw me out for no good reason. And I'm like, yeah, it was definitely his attitude. So I was trying to be neutral, and she was picking fights with literally everybody on the bus. I thought the bus driver was going to throw her off the bus at some point. But she got on the phone, got into a fight with her family. Apparently somebody borrowed her truck and ran most of the gas out of it or something. So that was a loud argument. And finally, she decided to start asking me what my deal was. And I said, well, I was down for an interview to teach. I just finished college. And suddenly things changed for the weird. Teacher, huh? Those guys get paid a lot of money. And I'm like, in what universe? If you get tired, you can just feel free to lean over on me. I'm like, nope, no, thank you. Diplomatically, though. So luckily she was off at the next stop. I think it was somewhere in Georgia. The last leg of the trip was not nearly as insane as the first half of it, but I ended up in the Nashville terminal for like 6 hours. Sitting there having a conversation with somebody who seemed to be fairly normal. And when I got back on the bus, I ended up seated next to a guy who was riding the Greyhound to Colorado. He spent his entire life traveling overseas. He was former Army, if I remember correctly. And we had a really long conversation. Apparently, he was acquainted with some people who worked at Murray State. They were in a wine tasting club or something, but he'd worked in the IT field, and with my IT background, he was able to hold a conversation. Best 3 hours of conversation I think I've had in a professional context in my life. And he got off at Paducah, and I got off at Paducah, and that was the end of that. But the Air Force Academy did call me back. They did make an offer, and I ended up turning it down because the place itself was nice, but the area was kind of questionable. The news was just incredibly bleak and depressing and violent. Turned on the news one time in my hotel room, and it cut into the middle of a news broadcast. An 87-year-old woman was set on fire by her home caregiver today. So I turned it off, got into the taxi that was going to take me back to the airport and bus terminal. And the other driver was from New York. And this guy was pretty much the exact opposite of the guy from Tennessee. He's like, hey, man, I'm not going to run the meter. If you want to see something really interesting, you and me, we can follow some of these people around. I was behind the cops one time, and they was following this guy who's like a drug dealer or something. I could see them rubbing cocaine into the – I'm like, I really have to catch my bus. Yeah, but I mean, this could be really exciting stuff. I mean, if you want to see it, you know, it won't take long. We can find somebody crazy around here. I'm like, yeah, it didn't take me very long at all. It was the first cab that I hailed. But yeah, he ended up getting me to the Greyhound station without getting into any high-speed chases. Maybe he's just an adrenaline junkie. I don't know. But sitting in the terminal in Florida was just about as depressing as any other bus terminal can be. And the terminal that wins for possibly being the most bizarre experience was one in between Georgia and Nashville. It was a smaller one. And I remember at that point, I really could have used a bathroom break. Stood up, and the person next to me agreed to watch my stuff, watch my spot, which, you know, there are decent people out there who are willing to do that. Just headed toward the bathroom when the intercom kicks on. The men's room is currently closed for sanitation purposes. There was a gastric incident, and as I look over, I see 3 people running with mops toward the men's room. So I thought, you know, I'll just hold it till Nashville or home or wherever, because this looks serious. So I have had a few other experiences in terms of bizarre interviews. If I can figure out enough information to leave them interesting but still keep from causing any problems for anyone, I will be happy to share those. But in the meantime, just hope this one works for you guys. Talk to you later.